The bouquet slipped from her hands and scattered across the fresh grass just as she saw the man. He was kneeling beside her father's grave, his shoulders shaking so hard it looked as though the weight of the entire world had finally crushed him. His worn janitor's uniform was stained with dust, and his trembling hands clutched the cold marble headstone as tears streamed down his face. For a moment, Olivia froze. What if you arrived at your loved one's grave and found a complete stranger grieving there as if they had lost family too? Would you walk away? Or would you stay and learn the story hidden behind those tears? Olivia Bennett was one of the youngest billionaires in America. At 32, she owned a thriving technology company in Chicago and lived in a penthouse overlooking the city skyline. Newspapers called her a genius. Business magazines called her unstoppable. But standing in that quiet cemetery outside a small Ohio town, none of those titles mattered. Today was the 10th anniversary of her father's death. Her father, Richard Bennett, had been the only person who believed in her when she had nothing. He worked long shifts driving delivery trucks, often returning home exhausted, but he never missed a school event, never forgot a birthday, and never stopped reminding her that success meant helping people, not impressing them. After his sudden heart attack, everything changed. Olivia buried herself in work. She built her company from a tiny rented office into a billion-dollar empire. Yet every year, no matter how busy life became, she returned to her father's grave carrying fresh roses. But she had never seen this man before. The stranger looked to be in his early 40s. His face carried the deep lines of someone who had fought too many battles alone. When he finally noticed Olivia standing nearby, embarrassment crossed his face. He quickly wiped his eyes and stood. Olivia expected him to leave. Instead, he gently touched the gravestone one last time before stepping back. Something in his expression stopped her. The grief wasn't ordinary. It was personal. Over the next few minutes, a story emerged that left Olivia speechless. The man's name was Michael Turner. He worked as a janitor at a local elementary school. He was raising an 8-year-old son alone after his wife died from cancer 4 years earlier. Since then, every day had been a struggle. He worked 2 jobs, slept little, and constantly worried about keeping a roof over their heads. But none of that explained why he was crying at Richard Bennett's grave. Then Michael revealed the truth. 10 years earlier, on the night Richard Bennett died, Michael had been homeless. His wife had been pregnant. He had lost his job. His car had been repossessed. They were living out of a cheap motel, surviving on vending machine snacks and borrowed money. That night, Michael sat outside a gas station trying to decide whether life was even worth continuing. The pressure, shame, and fear had become unbearable. Then a stranger approached him. It was Richard Bennett. Richard had just finished a long shift and noticed the young man sitting alone. Most people would have walked away. Richard didn't. He sat beside Michael for nearly an hour, listening without judgment. Before leaving, he handed him several $100s, enough groceries to last weeks, and the business card of a friend who was hiring warehouse workers. Most importantly, he gave Michael hope. A week later, Michael got the job. Months later, his son was born. Slowly, life improved. Richard never asked for repayment. In fact, Michael never saw him again. A few months afterward, he learned through a local newspaper that Richard Bennett had died unexpectedly. The news shattered him. For years, Michael visited the grave whenever life became difficult. It was his way of thanking the man who had unknowingly saved an entire family. Olivia listened silently. The cool autumn breeze moved through the cemetery trees, carrying a painful realization. Her father had never mentioned Michael. Not once. Because helping people wasn't something Richard did for recognition. It was simply who he was. As Michael spoke about the years after his wife's death, fresh tears filled his eyes. His son, Ethan, had recently been diagnosed with a serious heart condition. The surgery he needed could save his life, but even with insurance, the remaining costs were impossible. Michael had exhausted his savings. He was working every extra shift available. Yet he was still falling behind. That morning, feeling completely defeated, he came to the one person who had once given him hope. A man who was no longer alive. Olivia stared at her father's name engraved in stone. For years she had measured success through company valuations, investments, and headlines. Yet the greatest thing Richard Bennett ever built wasn't a business. It was a single act of kindness that continued changing lives a decade later. When Olivia left the cemetery that day, she couldn't stop thinking about Michael and Ethan. The image of that exhausted father haunted her. The next week, she quietly contacted the hospital handling Ethan's treatment. Then she made arrangements. No press releases. No interviews. No publicity. Just action. Several weeks later, Michael received a call informing him that the remaining balance for Ethan's surgery had been paid in full by an anonymous donor. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Then he cried harder than he had at the cemetery. The surgery was successful. Ethan recovered. For the first time in years, Michael could breathe without fear crushing his chest. Months passed. One spring morning, Olivia returned to her father's grave once again. This time she wasn't alone. A small boy ran across the grass carrying a bouquet of flowers almost too large for his arms. Behind him walked Michael. Ethan carefully placed the flowers beside the headstone and stood quietly for a moment. The child had never met Richard Bennett. Yet he was alive because of him. 3 generations connected by a single act of compassion. As sunlight filtered through the trees, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced since her father's death. Peace. Not because she missed him less, but because she finally understood him more. His legacy wasn't buried beneath the stone. It lived inside every person he had helped. Inside Michael. Inside Ethan. And now, inside her. For years Olivia had searched for meaning in success, but standing there beside a grateful father and a healthy child, she realized that wealth was never measured by what you keep. It is measured by what remains in the hearts of others long after you're gone. Before leaving, Michael placed his hand on the gravestone one final time. The tears in his eyes were still there. But they were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude. And somehow, that made them even more powerful. Speech balloon. Before you go, tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a small act of kindness that changed your life forever? As Olivia walked away from the cemetery, she looked back one last time and imagined her father smiling somewhere beyond the pain and loss of this world, knowing that one moment of compassion had become a chain of hope stretching across years, saving lives he would never even meet. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe so more people can be reminded that even the smallest act of kindness can create miracles long after we're gone.